Have you ever wondered why narcissists seem to be magnetically drawn to empaths, yet at the same time appear deeply threatened by them? They pursue empaths relentlessly, showering them with attention, promises, and declarations of love. But the moment an empath truly sees them, really sees them, something shifts. The narcissist becomes defensive, aggressive, even desperate. It's as if the empath possesses something that both attracts and terrifies them. Picture this scenario. You're in a relationship with someone who initially seemed perfect. They understood you like no one else ever had. They made you feel special, chosen, seen. But gradually, you started to notice something unsettling. The more authentic you became, the more uncomfortable they seemed. The more you expressed your true feelings, the more they tried to shut you down. The more you showed your genuine self, the more they tried to change you. Now imagine if you understood exactly what that something is. If you knew why your very existence as an empath represents their greatest fear, what would change in how you see yourself? How would it transform the way you navigate these toxic dynamics? How would it shift your understanding of every interaction you've ever had with a narcissist? That's what we're going to uncover today. Because the truth is, narcissists aren't afraid of your weakness. They're not threatened by your vulnerability or your sensitivity. They're terrified of your strength. They're terrified of your authenticity. They're terrified of your ability to see through their carefully constructed facade. And once you understand this, really understand this, everything changes. This isn't just about recognizing toxic behavior. This is about recognizing your own power. This is about understanding that what you've been told is your greatest weakness might actually be your greatest strength. This is about seeing yourself through new eyes, not as a victim, but as someone who possesses something so powerful that it threatens the very foundation of a narcissist's false reality. You've been taught to see yourself as the victim in narcissistic relationships, the sensitive one, the one who gets hurt, the one who gives too much and receives too little, the one who's too emotional, too trusting, too forgiving. Society has conditioned you to believe that your empathy is a liability, that your sensitivity is a weakness, that your ability to feel deeply is something to be ashamed of or hidden. But here's a truth that might shock you. Narcissists don't target empaths because they're weak. They target them because they're powerful. They don't choose empaths because they're easy to manipulate. They choose them because they possess something the narcissist desperately wants, but can never have: authentic emotional depth. Think about it. Have you ever noticed how narcissists seem to have a radar for empaths? They can spot you across a crowded room. They know exactly which buttons to push, which wounds to poke, which dreams to promise. They seem to understand your emotional landscape better than you understand it yourself. But why? What is it about empaths that draws them like moths to a flame? The answer lies in what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, the shared psychological material that connects all human beings. Jung said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves." But what happens when someone can see through your mask so clearly that they reflect back everything you're trying to hide? What happens when someone's very presence exposes the emptiness you've spent your life concealing? That's exactly what empaths do to narcissists, and it terrifies them. You see, narcissists live in a carefully constructed reality where they are the center, the most important, the most valuable. They've built elaborate defense mechanisms to protect this false self. They surround themselves with people who validate their grandiosity, who feed their ego, who never question their narrative. Their entire world is designed to reinforce the illusion that they are superior, special, above the ordinary human experience of vulnerability, and pain. But empaths have this inconvenient ability to see beyond the performance. They feel the pain behind the arrogance. They sense the fear behind the control. They recognize the wounded child behind the grandiose mask. And this creates a fundamental threat to everything the narcissist has built. Because here's what most people don't understand about narcissistic supply. It's not just about admiration or attention. It's about maintaining the illusion. The narcissist needs people around them who will participate in their false reality, who will reflect back the image they want to see of themselves. They need people who will see them as they pretend to be, not as they actually are. But empaths are truth-tellers by nature. Even when they don't speak, their very presence communicates authenticity. They can't help but respond to the real person underneath the mask. They see the humanity that the narcissist is trying so desperately to hide. And this creates a problem for the narcissist. Because if someone can see through their facade so easily, what does that say about the facade itself? What does it reveal about the person hiding behind it? This is why the narcissist-empath dynamic is so intense, so magnetic, and so destructive. The narcissist is simultaneously drawn to what the empath represents and threatened by what the empath sees. They want the empath's authenticity, but they fear the empath's perception. They crave the empath's emotional depth, but they're terrified of the empath's ability to see their emotional poverty. And so begins a psychological war that most empaths don't even realize they're fighting. A war where the battlefield is your sense of reality, your self-worth, your very identity. A war where the narcissist's primary weapon is your own empathy, turned against you. But why does this visibility feel so threatening to the narcissist? To understand this, we need to explore what Jung called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the aspects we've buried so deep we've forgotten they exist. The shadow contains everything we don't want to be, everything we're ashamed of, everything we've rejected about ourselves. For most people, the shadow is a source of discomfort, but also potential growth. Jung believed that integrating the shadow, acknowledging and accepting these rejected parts of ourselves, was essential for psychological wholeness. He called this process individuation. Becoming who you truly are by accepting all parts of yourself, both light and dark. But narcissists have built their entire identity on rejecting their shadow. They've created a false self that is perfect, superior, untouchable. Everything that doesn't fit this grandiose image gets pushed into the shadow and denied. Their vulnerability, their pain, their fear, their shame, all of it gets buried beneath layers of grandiosity and superiority. This creates what psychologists call a fragmented psyche. The narcissist's conscious mind knows only the grandiose false self, while their unconscious mind contains all the rejected humanity they refuse to acknowledge. And this fragmentation requires constant maintenance. They must constantly prove their superiority, constantly seek validation, constantly defend against anything that might threaten their false self-image. But empaths, by their very nature, are connected to the full spectrum of human emotion. They don't just feel their own pain, they feel everyone's pain, including the narcissists. They don't run from difficult emotions, they move through them. They don't hide from their shadow, they learn from it. This makes them naturally integrated in a way that the narcissist can never be. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for the narcissist. When an empath looks at them, they don't see the grandiose performance. They see the terrified child who was never allowed to be vulnerable. They see the deep shame that drives the need for constant validation. They see the profound loneliness that exists behind the wall of superiority. They see the shadow that the narcissist has spent their entire life trying to hide. This is why narcissists both crave and fear empaths. They crave the unconditional acceptance that empaths naturally offer. The empath's ability to see their pain without judgment, to feel their fear without running away, to recognize their humanity despite their mask. This is something the narcissist has never experienced. It's what they've been searching for their entire life. But they also fear this visibility because it threatens their entire psychological structure. If someone can see their shadow so clearly, if someone can feel their pain so deeply, then maybe the shadow is real. Maybe the pain is valid. Maybe the false self isn't as perfect as they've convinced themselves it is. The empath's ability to feel deeply threatens the narcissist's carefully maintained emotional numbness. The empath's authenticity exposes the narcissist's performance. The empath's capacity for genuine connection reveals the narcissist's profound isolation. The empath's willingness to be vulnerable highlights the narcissist's terror of vulnerability. But there's something even deeper happening here. Something that goes to the core of what narcissists fear most about empaths. It's not just that empaths can see their shadow. It's that empaths represent everything the narcissist could have been if they had chosen integration instead of fragmentation, authenticity instead of performance, vulnerability instead of grandiosity. The empath is living proof that it's possible to feel deeply and still be strong, that it's possible to be vulnerable and still be powerful, that it's possible to acknowledge your shadow and still be worthy of love. And this is perhaps the most threatening thing of all to someone who has built their entire identity on the belief that vulnerability equals weakness, that authenticity equals inadequacy, that feeling deeply equals being broken. What narcissists fear most about empaths isn't their sensitivity, it's their authenticity. Because authenticity is the one thing that cannot be faked, manipulated, or controlled. And narcissists are experts at control. They've spent their entire lives learning how to control their image, control other people's perceptions, control the narrative around them. But authenticity operates by different rules entirely. Jung understood that authentic power comes from integration, from accepting all parts of ourselves, including the parts we don't like. This integration creates what he called psychological wholeness, a state where all aspects of the psyche work together, rather than against each other. When someone achieves this integration, they become incredibly difficult to manipulate because their sense of self isn't dependent on external validation or approval. Empaths, through their willingness to feel everything, naturally move toward this integration. They don't run from pain, they transform it. They don't hide from their shadows, they learn from them. They don't reject their vulnerability, they find strength in it. This process isn't always conscious. Many empaths don't realize they're doing it, but it happens nonetheless. This represents everything the narcissist cannot do. The narcissist's power is based on rejection, rejecting vulnerability, rejecting imperfection, rejecting anything that doesn't fit their grandiose self-image. But this rejection creates a fundamental weakness. They become dependent on external validation to maintain their false self. They need constant admiration, constant praise, constant confirmation that they are as special as they believe themselves to be. Empaths, on the other hand, derive their strength from internal validation. They know who they are because they have felt who they are. They've sat with their pain, processed their emotions, integrated their experiences. This doesn't mean they don't need love or connection. They do. But their sense of self isn't contingent on what others think of them. They can love themselves even when others don't understand them. This makes them incredibly difficult to manipulate because their sense of reality isn't dependent on the narcissist's approval. When a narcissist tries to gaslight an integrated empath, the empath can trust their own perceptions. When a narcissist tries to make an empath feel inadequate, the empath knows their own worth. When a narcissist tries to isolate an empath, the empath maintains their connection to their own truth. And this is what truly terrifies narcissists. They can't control someone who doesn't need their approval. They can't manipulate someone who trusts their own emotional reality. They can't gaslight someone who has already faced their own darkness and emerged stronger. They can't break someone who has already been broken and learned how to heal. The empath's emotional intelligence exposes the narcissist's emotional poverty. The empath's capacity for growth highlights the narcissist's stagnation. The empath's ability to love themselves, flaws and all, reveals the narcissist's fundamental self-hatred. The empath's willingness to be real in a world of pretense makes the narcissist's performance look hollow by comparison. But perhaps most threatening of all is the empath's capacity for genuine intimacy. Narcissists crave intimacy, but are terrified of it, because true intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens their false self. They want to be known and loved, but only the false self they've created, not the real person underneath. Empaths, however, understand that true intimacy is only possible when we allow ourselves to be fully seen, shadows and all. They're willing to be vulnerable because they understand that vulnerability is the price of authentic connection. They're willing to show their imperfections because they know that perfection is an illusion that prevents real love. This creates an impossible situation for the narcissist. They want what the empath has, the ability to love and be loved authentically, but they're not willing to pay the price for it. They want intimacy without vulnerability, love without risk, connection without authenticity. And when they realize that the empath won't settle for anything less than genuine connection, they become desperate. This desperation manifests in increasingly controlling behavior. If they can't have authentic intimacy with the empath, they'll try to destroy the empath's capacity for authentic intimacy altogether. If they can't be real with the empath, they'll try to make the empath as fake as they are. If they can't rise to the empath's level of authenticity, they'll try to drag the empath down to their level of performance. But here's where it gets really interesting. Once you understand that narcissists fear your authentic power, you begin to see their behavior differently. Every manipulation tactic they use is actually a defense mechanism against your power. Every attempt to control you is actually an admission of their own powerlessness. Every effort to diminish you is actually evidence of how threatened they are by your strength. When they love bomb you in the beginning, they're not expressing genuine love. They're trying to create dependency. They're studying your vulnerabilities, learning your triggers, mapping your emotional landscape so they can use it against you later. The intensity of the love bombing is directly proportional to how powerful they perceive you to be. The more authentic, integrated, and emotionally intelligent you are, the harder they'll work to hook you. When they begin the devaluation phase, they're not responding to anything you've done wrong. They're responding to their growing awareness that you see through them. Every criticism, every put down, every attempt to make you feel inadequate is actually their fear of your adequacy. They're trying to make you doubt the very qualities that threaten them most: your intuition, your emotional intelligence, your ability to see truth. When they gaslight you, they're trying to make you doubt the very perception that sees through them. When they project their flaws onto you, they're trying to make you carry the shame they refuse to feel. When they rage at your boundaries, they're revealing how much your self-respect threatens their control. When they give you the silent treatment, they're trying to punish you for not playing along with their false reality. Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Narcissists cannot do this, but empaths can. And this creates an unbearable dynamic for the narcissist because they're constantly confronted with someone who possesses what they lack: genuine self-acceptance. This is why narcissistic relationships often escalate in intensity over time. The narcissist becomes increasingly desperate to break down the empath's sense of self, because the empath's wholeness is a constant reminder of their own fragmentation. They need the empath to be as broken as they are, as fake as they are, as dependent on external validation as they are. But here's what most empaths don't realize. This fear can be your greatest protection. Once you understand that their aggression comes from their terror of your power, you stop taking their behavior personally. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who fears your worth. You stop dimming your light to make them comfortable in their darkness. You begin to see their attempts at control for what they really are: desperate attempts to manage their own terror. Their criticism isn't about your flaws. It's about their fear of your strengths. Their manipulation isn't about your weakness. It's about their awareness of your power. Their rage isn't about your inadequacy. It's about their inadequacy in the face of your authenticity. This shift in perspective is revolutionary because it moves you from a position of defense to a position of understanding. Instead of constantly trying to prove that you're not what they say you are, you begin to understand why they need to say it. Instead of fighting against their projections, you begin to see them as revelations of their own internal state. When you understand that every attack on your character is actually a defense against your power, you stop giving their opinions weight. When you realize that every attempt to control you is actually an admission of their own lack of control, you stop participating in their power games. When you see that every effort to diminish you is actually evidence of how much you threaten their false reality, you stop trying to make yourself smaller. This doesn't mean you become arrogant or cruel. It means you become sovereign. You understand that your empathy is not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength to be protected. Your sensitivity is not a flaw to be hidden, but a gift to be honored. Your authenticity is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be celebrated. So what changes when you truly understand this? Everything. You stop seeing yourself as a victim and start recognizing yourself as a threat to their false reality, a threat to their control, a threat to their carefully maintained delusions. But more importantly, you start recognizing yourself as powerful in ways you never imagined. This doesn't mean you become arrogant or cruel. It means you become sovereign. You understand that your empathy is not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength to be protected. Your sensitivity is not a flaw to be hidden, but a gift to be honored. Your authenticity is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be celebrated. When you truly grasp that narcissists fear your power, you stop giving it away. You stop explaining yourself to people who are threatened by your truth. You stop trying to heal people who are afraid of healing. You stop making yourself smaller to accommodate people who are intimidated by your size. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable in their darkness. Carl Jung spoke about individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. For empaths, this process often involves recognizing that their greatest perceived weakness is actually their greatest strength. The very qualities that make you a target for narcissists are the same qualities that make you powerful beyond their comprehension. Your ability to feel deeply gives you access to wisdom they'll never possess. While they're trapped in the shallow waters of their false self, you have access to the depths of human experience. You understand pain and joy, fear and love, despair and hope in ways that create profound wisdom and insight. Your capacity for authentic connection creates relationships they'll never experience. While they're surrounded by people who validate their false self, you have the ability to form genuine bonds based on truth, vulnerability, and mutual respect. You can love and be loved for who you really are, not for the mask you wear. Your willingness to face your shadow develops strength they'll never achieve. While they're running from their own darkness, you're learning from yours. Every time you face a difficult emotion, process a painful experience, or integrate a rejected part of yourself, you become stronger, wiser, more whole. Your authenticity creates a presence they can never fake. When you walk into a room as your genuine self, people feel it. There's a quality to authentic presence that can't be manufactured or performed. It's magnetic, healing, transformative. It's what draws people to you and what terrifies those who live behind masks. But perhaps most importantly, your integration creates an unshakable foundation that no one can destroy. When you know yourself, really know yourself, shadows and all, no one can tell you who you are. When you've faced your own darkness and found light within it, no one can convince you that you're broken. When you've learned to love yourself completely, no one can make you believe you're unworthy. This is what narcissists fear most about empaths. Not your sensitivity, but your strength. Not your vulnerability, but your power. Not your capacity to be hurt, but your capacity to heal. Not your ability to feel pain, but your ability to transform it into wisdom. The question isn't whether narcissists fear empaths. The question is, are you ready to stop fearing your own power? Are you ready to stop apologizing for being everything they wish they could be, but are too afraid to become? Are you ready to embrace the very qualities that make you a threat to their false reality? Because here's the truth they don't want you to know. You are not too sensitive. You are not too much. You are not broken or flawed or inadequate. You are exactly what they fear most. Someone who knows their own worth. Someone who trusts their own truth. Someone who can see through their performance to the frightened child underneath. Your empathy is not a liability. It's a superpower. Your sensitivity is not a weakness. It's a strength. Your authenticity is not something to hide. It's something to celebrate. And your ability to see through their mask is not something to doubt. It's something to trust. When you fully embrace this truth, when you stop seeing yourself through their eyes and start seeing yourself through the eyes of truth, everything changes. You stop being available for their games. You stop participating in their drama. You stop trying to prove your worth to people who are threatened by it. You become unavailable for anything that doesn't honor your truth, respect your boundaries, or celebrate your authenticity. You become selective about who gets access to your energy, your time, your emotional investment. You become protective of the very qualities that make you powerful. And in doing so, you reclaim not just your power, but your life. You stop living in reaction to their fear and start living in alignment with your truth. You stop trying to heal their brokenness and start celebrating your wholeness. You stop apologizing for your light and start shining it brightly. Now tell me in the comments, Have you ever noticed a narcissist becoming more aggressive the more authentic you became? Have you experienced their fear disguised as anger? Share your experience. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to recognize their own power. Remember, you're not too sensitive. You're not too much. You're exactly what they fear most, someone who knows their own worth. And that's not something to apologize for. That's something to celebrate.